Many of you have heard of the term Typhoid Mary, but may not know its origins or the massive public health and moral dilemma caused by the treatment of this individual when it comes to how to weigh the importance of public health and liberties, even when the two seem at odds of one of each other. In the book I read for this presentation, Typhoid Mary, Captive to the Public's Health, the author lays out a story of a working-class individual, Mary Mallon, and her experiences during the typhoid epidemic in the early 1900s. Mary Mallon worked as a cook for wealthy families in New York City in the years 1900 to 1907. During this time, typhoid was an epidemic that was sweeping through urban America with a total of 12,670 reported deaths in the year 1907. This disease, without proper treatment, had a fatality rate anywhere between 10 and 30%. Mary worked for 8 families over the span of time, 7 of which had cases of typhoid appear. Since medical record keeping wasn't as advanced as it is in present day, no connections were made that the common factor in all of these households was a single chef. That is, until Mary was hired by a man named Charles Warren, whose daughter ended up dying after she contracted typhoid from Mary. He hired an investigator by the name of George Soper, who eventually figured out that it was Mary who had given Charles' daughter typhoid and all the subsequent houses she had worked for in the past. Mary was forcibly quarantined for the first time in 1907 till the year 1910. Eventually, after almost 3 years of quarantine, she was released on the condition that she take measures to stop spreading typhoid and to not work as a cook again. Mary spent her first few years out of quarantine as a laundress, or someone who was employed to do someone else's laundry. But this didn't pay nearly as well as her previous job as a cook, so eventually she defied her agreement and went back to work as a cook in larger establishments such as hotels and restaurants. Almost everywhere she worked, there were typhoid cases that popped up within them, and she had to move locations regularly to avoid being found. Eventually, however, in 1915, after she started working at the Sloan Hospital for Women in New York City, 25 people were infected of typhoid, 2 of whom died at this place. Mary was arrested shortly after and was sentenced to a second indefinite quarantine where she would spend the rest of her life, eventually dying in 1938 at the age of 69. Here are some of the points to consider when thinking through the case of Typhoid Mary. At the time, there had never been a documented case of someone who appeared healthy but was actually capable of spreading disease. Even in 1907, germ theory, which is the theory that microorganisms that we now know of as germs lead to disease, wasn't fully accepted in the scientific community. This meant that the practices like washing one's hands before handling food weren't even common practice at the time. In Mary's perspective, some strange man she had never met was telling her she was sick and getting others sick, even though she felt completely healthy. Even when tests came back that found large concentration of typhoid present in her stool, how was an Irish immigrant, non-college educated cook supposed to understand fairly new science behind microorganisms and germs? It all must have seemed absurd to her. On the other hand, we all know what it feels like to be told information about diseases that we don't fully understand. After almost 2 years of living during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have had to trust in medical professionals who give us information on topics we don't have the training to understand, whether it's how masks work and which ones to wear, or how the vaccine works and how it benefits us all. We have all experienced this. We are all college educated and currently pursuing higher education, so we are privileged to have some degree of information literacy that Mary didn't have. But we, to some extent, have all put blind trust in the medical field during this time in order to hopefully save the lives of others and ourselves. So shouldn't we expect someone like Mary to do the same? Some may reach different conclusions than others when thinking about these concepts. These 4 articles that I have briefly summarized in this slide all give a slightly different perspective on the Typhoid Mary case, and I agree with almost all the information given in these pieces. The one similarity is the overarching ambiguity of whether what happened to Mary was right or wrong. A woman was being told she was sick and infecting others without her knowledge while she felt completely fine. There has never been a documented case of an asymptomatic superspreader, and the science surrounding it was quite new at the time. At the same time, this woman was putting thousands of lives at risk, and even after given the opportunity of freedom, she chose to break the rules given to her, leading to the infection and deaths of many more people. My personal view is this. Mary was a case never seen before, yet it was handled with rigid measures. Cases like this, especially those as new as in Mary's case, should be left flexible and dealt with on a week-to-week, month-to-month, or even year-to-year basis. Similarly to our handling of COVID-19, we need to be able to adapt as new information comes out about the disease instead of blindly making assumptions that may unnecessarily harm individuals. I leave you all with this closing question. Was Mary a symbol of a threat to individual liberty or a necessary sacrifice to public health?